In this presentation, we'll go over how to develop speeches and presentations. By the end of this presentation, you should be able to list reasons why public speaking skills are important, determine your presentation's rhetorical situation by considering purpose, audience, and tone, discuss how different presentation formats can be used for different situations, convert a written argument into a presentation, define basic guidelines for visual aids, and rehearse and prepare for a presentation. For thousands of years and countless reasons, people have been communicating ideas through public speeches. In ancient Greece, learning how to speak in front of an audience was considered a crucial skill that could enable people in democratic societies to quite literally share their voices. It was during this time that the Greek scholar Aristotle established the foundations for formal rhetoric by identifying the three means of persuasion used in public speaking: the ethical appeal, the logical appeal, and the emotional appeal. To this day, speeches, along with other types of oral and visual presentations, continue to be highly valuable tools for communication in our society. When developing a speech or presentation, you'll first need to determine your rhetorical situation by considering your purpose, audience, and tone. Speeches and presentations can serve many different purposes depending on who is presenting and what type of presentation is being delivered. For example, comedians present comedy acts in order to entertain their audiences. Politicians participate in debates in an attempt to persuade audiences to agree with their arguments. The U.S. President delivers an annual speech known as the State of the Union to inform Americans about the current condition of the nation. It's important to keep in mind, though, that not all speeches are made by professional speakers on big stages in front of large audiences. In fact, the vast majority of speeches and presentations are made every day by average people in front of smaller audiences, most commonly in the workplace and in academic settings. First, presentations are often required in the professional world. The degree to which jobs require public speaking skills and the audiences that must be addressed will vary greatly depending on the profession. For example, a journalist for a newspaper may only need to present a writing topic to the editor of the newspaper to persuade him or her that the topic is worth writing about, while a television news reporter presents the news to a much larger audience, people who watch the news on TV, to keep them informed on what's happening in the world. Additionally, a salesperson presents pitches to clients to persuade them to purchase a product or invest in an idea, while a restaurant manager may need to present monthly sales reports to the restaurant's owners to keep them informed on the restaurant's financial progress. Presentations are also commonly used in academic settings. For example, teachers present lessons to educate their students about a subject, and students are often asked to deliver presentations like book reports to their classmates and teacher to explain what they've learned about a subject. In addition, public speaking skills are particularly important for professional scholars who often attend conferences where they present new ideas related to their fields of study to other scholars in that field. Typically, scholars first write these ideas in detailed essays, reports, or articles that are then published in academic books, magazines, or journals. Then, these written arguments are converted into presentations that summarize the material, which makes it easier for several scholars to get together and share their ideas in a single conference. Similarly, in college courses, you may be asked to convert a written argument into a presentation to share your research with your professor and classmates. When thinking about your audience, It's important to keep in mind that presenting an idea to an audience is quite a bit different than simply writing an idea to an audience. When writing, you communicate your message to an audience indirectly. Generally, your ideas are written down, and your audience reads your ideas at some point in the future. When presenting, however, you communicate your message to your audience directly. The audience members are, in most cases, physically present when you share your ideas. They generally watch your presentation at the same time, and rather than simply reading what you have to say, they can physically hear you and see you. For these reasons, it's even more important to carefully consider your audience when presenting than it is when writing. Pay attention to your audience's reactions as you deliver your presentation and adjust as necessary to keep them engaged. While speeches and presentations used to only be delivered to in-person audiences, it's not uncommon these days to deliver presentations via phone, online video conferencing services such as Zoom or WebEx, or other media platforms. Sometimes live streaming presentations may have more than one type of audience. For example, some viewers may watch the presentation live, while others may watch a recorded version of the presentation later. In this presentation, we'll focus on presenting that uses the traditional in-person format, but be sure to keep these factors about your audience in mind when developing your presentation and make adjustments as needed. Establishing a suitable tone for your presentation is key to keeping your audience engaged. While written arguments depend heavily on diction and style to reveal tone, presenters have the added benefit of being able to modulate their tone of voice, use stage presence, and use body language to emphasize their points and engage their audience. Much like when writing, you'll need to use diction and style that is appropriate for your purpose and audience. For example, a scientist giving a presentation to other scientists in the same field need not define scientific terms that the audience is likely already familiar with. The biggest difference between diction and style in writing and presenting is that while you can generally use more complex wording and sentence structure when writing, it's better to use clear and simple language when presenting. Your audience cannot stop and reread your presentation to clarify an idea as they can with writing. For this reason, it's also important to use a structure that is easy to follow, which we'll go over in more detail later in this presentation. A common stylistic technique used in speeches and presentations is the repetition of particular words or phrases to drive a point home or add emphasis. Next, consider your tone of voice. Be sure to speak clearly and enunciate your words. Use an appropriate volume to ensure that everyone in the space can hear you, and try not to speak too quickly or too slowly. Avoid excessive ums and uhs. Don't use informal language or slang, and avoid using a monotonous tone. Instead, vary your tone as you would when speaking normally, and aim for a natural conversational rhythm. If you don't sound interested in your subject, your audience won't be interested either. You can also shift your tone of voice to keep your audience engaged by speaking more loudly or softly to emphasize points. Finally, while most formal writing is limited to the third-person point of view, it's almost always appropriate to use the first-person point of view when presenting, because a speaker is quite literally inserted into the conversation. Additionally, you can set the tone by using body language and stage presence. Regardless of the audience or occasion, you should always appear presentable when presenting. Dress nicely and professionally and avoid distracting clothing. Also aim to use a neutral background whenever possible. Remember that your goal is for the audience to focus on you and your message, not on what's going on around you. If you have room, move around on stage and use hand gestures naturally. Don't forget that you can also use facial expressions to emphasize points. Avoid hiding behind a podium or looking at visual aids for longer than necessary. Instead, use good posture and maintain eye contact with your audience, shifting your focus from person to person around the room to ensure that everyone feels involved in the conversation. Like argumentative writing, presentations should also use a variety of rhetorical appeals. Follow the same guidelines discussed in the rhetoric presentation to determine how you should use ethical appeals, emotional appeals, and logical appeals in your presentation. Next, take some time to structure your presentation. When converting a previously written argument into a presentation, be sure to make an outline and consider any time restraints you may have for your presentation. The overall structure of your presentation should closely resemble that of your written argument. Use clearly distinguishable sections, an introduction, a body, and a conclusion. However, since you won't be able to use paragraphs to break up information into separate ideas, you'll have to rely on other methods to organize your presentation to ensure that your reader is able to follow your points. Before you begin, introduce yourself and provide the title of your presentation. The introduction should quickly grab the audience's attention with a hook, such as a startling fact, a brief narration or example, a relevant quotation, or a short discussion about how you became interested in the topic. A great way to connect with the audience is to frame your overall thesis or claim as a question, an inclusive, stylistic strategy that invites the audience to participate in the conversation and stimulates their curiosity. The introduction should also give the audience an indication as to what the main talking points will be. In the body of your presentation, you should clearly state the talking points again as they come up, which will serve as cues to the audience that you're moving to the next point, much like topic sentences in a written argument. If you're converting a written argument into a presentation, keep in mind that you will likely have time constraints and may not be able to include all of the supporting evidence from your original argument. Instead of trying to cram everything in, choose only a few of the most important details to discuss. Finally, rather than simply summarizing what has already been said in the presentation, consider using a forward-looking statement in your conclusion by briefly discussing how the information you've provided can be applied in some way. For example, a persuasive presentation might end with a call to action that encourages the audience to do something or change their way of thinking. You could also ask the audience a thought-provoking question or refer back to an example presented in your introduction. The goal of your conclusion should be to make a lasting impact on the audience. If time allows, you can open the discussion up to the audience at the end and answer any questions they may have. If the format of your presentation allows, consider using visual aids. Visual aids are especially helpful when including complex information that may be difficult to describe using speech alone. Visual aids can be as simple as an image, a poster, or a whiteboard or chalkboard. Another option is to provide the audience with handouts. When possible, though, you should avoid distributing handouts until they are necessary. Otherwise, you might find your audience looking at the handout during your presentation instead of focusing on you and your message. The most common types of visual aids are digital slideshows or presentations made with programs such as PowerPoint, Prezi, or Google Slides. When creating slideshows, consider the following guidelines. Begin your slideshow with a title slide that states the title of your presentation and your name. Limit the content of each slide to information that can be processed relatively quickly. Remember that your audience's attention should be focused on you, not your slideshow. Limit bullet points to single words or short phrases, and always avoid lengthy blocks of text. The design of your slideshow should be simple overall. Avoid flashy images, patterns, and slide transitions. If you cite from outside sources in your presentation, end with a slide that provides bibliographic information for those sources, or provide the audience with a handout of this information. Keep the following in mind when adding text, images, and other types of media to your slideshow. First, your text should be large enough for everyone in your audience to see. Avoid using distracting fonts or colors that are hard to read, and keep your text formatting consistent throughout your slideshow. Next, carefully select images for your presentation. Only use images that add to your presentation in some way. Avoid clip art or other unnecessary images. Charts and graphs can be especially helpful for more complex information. Finally, you can also include audio or video clips, but only use them if they contribute to your presentation in a meaningful way. Lastly, remember that it's completely normal to feel nervous about presenting, as public speaking is a very common fear. Rehearsing your presentation can greatly reduce your presentation anxiety. Rather than memorizing your presentation word for word, practice each section of your presentation until you feel you can discuss each of your talking points comfortably and naturally. Refer to note cards if you get stuck, but try not to rely on them too much. If you use visual aids, you can refer to slide titles instead to help you stay on track. When practicing, make sure you meet any time restraints that may be required. If you're especially nervous, consider practicing in front of someone to get used to presenting with an audience. It's always better to get the jitters out with someone you know and feel comfortable with. Finally, you should test any visual aids or audio clips that you plan to use in your presentation to make sure everything is functioning properly, and arrive early so you can get familiar with the equipment you'll be using before you start. Finally, think positively before you begin your presentation. Instead of worrying about what might go wrong, focus on how great you'll feel once you've completed your presentation successfully. Overall, though presentations can be stressful, working through the steps discussed in this presentation will help you set yourself up for success and gain more confidence in your public speaking skills. Let's review. In this presentation, we discussed how to use public speaking skills in both professional and academic settings, determine your presentation's rhetorical situation by considering purpose, audience, and tone, discuss how different presentation formats can be used for different situations, convert a written argument into a presentation, define basic guidelines for visual aids, and rehearse and prepare for a presentation. As always, thanks for watching.